Americans of African descent have long endured violence. Since snatched from their birthplace and landing on these shores, terror, tragedy, intimidation, fear, violence, and courage has epitomized their struggle. Sometimes passive, sometimes aggressive, but always hopeful they would be a part of the American dream. Harriet Tubman, Nat Turner, Frederick Douglass, W.B. Du Bois, Fannie Lou Hamer, all fighting for the same cause, freedom.
Before I be a slave, I be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Freedom has remained elusive for many Americans of African descent. The 20th century was no different. It signaled the need for a new time and a new voice. On January 15, 1929, Mrs. Alberta King gave birth to her first baby boy in Atlanta, Georgia. Born as Michael Luther King Jr., the family later changed his name to Martin. His father and grandfather had both pastored Ebenezer Baptist Church. Growing up, Martin excelled in school and at age 15 entered Morehouse College. He graduated with a degree in sociology in 1948 at the age of 19. That same year, he was ordained and went on to further his studies at Crozier Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania, where he received his BA degree in divinity. From there, he attended Boston University, receiving his PhD in philosophy at age 26. While attending Boston University, he met Coretta Scott, an aspiring concert singer. She vividly recalls those days.
When I first saw Martin, he was driving his 51 green Chevrolet. And I walked down and looked at him and I said, my goodness, he's so young and he's so short. He looked just like a little boy. But, as he talked, he just grew taller and taller. And he was very, very mature. And so I soon forgot about all of that.
Returning to Atlanta, he followed the steps of his father and grandfather. In 1954, Martin received a call to come to Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Little did anyone realize that this church, just a half block from the state capitol, would become a landmark in history and propel the young preacher from Georgia to national and international prominence. The sequence which began these world-changing events started simply. On December 1st, 1955, a 42-year-old seamstress named Mrs. Rosa Parks boarded a Montgomery bus. Along the way, the seats filled, leaving a white man no place to sit in the front of the bus. The custom and strictly enforced Jim Crow law forced any black rider to yield his or her seat to someone white. Occasionally, someone would protest, but it was done silently or in action by leaving the bus. Black riders rarely protested. They usually just complied. This day, however, Rosa Parks refused to move and was arrested. The word soon spread throughout Montgomery. The town's black community organized with spontaneity to boycott city buses. Blacks in the city organized the Montgomery Improvement Association and elected Dr. King as its spokesperson and president. The boycott organizers at first only hoped to have community cooperation. To their surprise, when the first post-boycott buses rolled, only a few blacks boarded. Success seemed imminent, but not without struggle. As blacks walked, formed carpools, and found creative ways to travel to work, the white power structure began countering their effort. On December 10th, they stopped all bus service to the black community. A loss of revenue prompted city officials to file suit. They claimed blacks illegally operated a transportation system. They declared any of the cars and station wagons used by area churches to support the boycott in violation of city ordinance. Montgomery Mayor W.A. Gale ordered the city's legal department to file such proceedings as it may deem proper to end the boycott. On January 26, Montgomery police officers arrested Dr. King for driving 30 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. 4 days later, while he spoke in a church, his home was bombed. The battle that began in the streets then moved to the courts. On February 1st, 1956, 5 women from the boycott filed suit asking the court to declare Montgomery's travel segregation laws unconstitutional. City officials countered, indicting Dr. King and others for conspiracy to hinder and prevent the operation of business without just or legal cause. In May of that year, the federal courts found racial segregation on city bus lines unconstitutional. In November, the United States Supreme Court upheld that ruling.
I hereby defy a ruling handed down by the United States Supreme Court ordering desegregation of public carriers. Alabama state law requiring segregation of races on buses still stands.
I have this day issued orders to the Chief of Police and the Police Department to continue to make arrests in all violations with reference to the segregation laws.
Meanwhile, white-owned Montgomery insurance companies set up another roadblock. They canceled the policies on church vehicles used in the boycott.
That was when Martin called me in Atlanta and said, "Can you get me some insurance?" I said, "Of course." That's what I thought. I didn't know until I called one of my companies that I'd been doing considerable business with. "So you talking about the Montgomery bus boycott?" I said, "Sure, why?" He said, "Haven't you heard? The word has been passed around that anybody that touches will be kicked out of the insurance business." I said, "But I'm in a risk-taking business. And this time, mister, the cause is greater than the risk, and I'm taking it. So tell them to get the shoes and the feet ready, because they're going to have to keep me out."
And the cars and the movement rolled on. In 1957, Atlanta hosted a conference attended by a number of African American clergy. From this, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, began. Dr. King became founder and president. That same year, he appeared on the cover of Time magazine. While in New York City autographing books, an attempt was made on his life.
Before I knew it, I had been stabbed by this demented woman. But there was a letter. It came from a little girl. She said, "While it should not matter, I would like to mention that I'm a white girl. And I read that if you had sneezed, you would have died. And I'm simply writing you to say that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze."
The nonviolent protest movement of the late Mahatma Gandhi had long fascinated Dr. King. In 1959, Dr. and Mrs. King spent a month in India as guest of Prime Minister Nehru to study Gandhi's nonviolent techniques. In 1960, the King family moved to Atlanta after serving 6 years at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. Dr. King became co-pastor with his father at Ebenezer Baptist Church, allowing him more time to devote to the civil rights movement. Inspired by Dr. King, other U.S. cities began to take up the cause for freedom.
I would say first that at this moment, we must decide that we will no longer spend our money in businesses that discriminate against Negro.
The new time and new voice gave the nation a wake-up call. Lunch counter demonstrations, sit-ins, kneel-ins became commonplace. Students got involved in schools throughout the South, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC or SNCC, was formed.
I wrote to Martin Luther King Jr. and told him of my desire to attend this little school, and he wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket to travel to Montgomery to meet with him. It was a wonderful experience. I would never, ever forget it. That one visit with him changed my life.
Other older civil rights organizations also attacked entrenched Southern laws and customs. The Congress of Racial Equality, known as CORE, formed a vital link in the nonviolent protest chain. CORE, founded in 1942, organized interstate freedom bus rides to protest bus segregation laws. Attacks on these efforts often ended in tragedy.
You can never whip these birds if you don't keep you and them separate. You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
And the best thing for King to do is to get out of Alabama as quickly as he can, because he's a menace to the peace of this city.
He started writing around the margins of the newspaper. I mean, he just right along the edges, all around the newspaper, because he didn't have any paper. And when he finished writing around the edges of the newspaper and used up all of the free space on the newspaper, he started writing on the toilet tissue.
My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. For years now I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white in color, when your first name becomes nigger, your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John, and your wife and mother are never given the respected title Mrs., then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait.
This wave of racial unrest brought thousands of people together in the summer of 1963. The August 28th March on Washington drew more than 200,000 people from across the nation to the Lincoln Memorial. There, this eloquent orator and compassionate leader mesmerized the world with one of the greatest speeches of this century.
I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. Every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. I say to you today, my friend, let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let
The world community continued lauding Dr. King for his efforts. In October 1964, Dr. King received the Nobel Peace Prize, the youngest person and second African American so honored.
We've come to register to vote. What kind of people are you?
Saying that this is an unlawful assembly, you're ordered to disperse, go home, or go to your church. This march will not continue.
Yet in America, the violence continued and spread. Americans saw serious racial ugliness unfold on their television screens in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia.
All the world today knows that we are here and we are standing before the forces of power in the state of Alabama saying we ain't gonna let nobody turn us around.
The 89th Congress acted swiftly in passing this act. And I intend to act with equal dispatch in enforcing this act.
The protest ultimately led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act, which was signed into law by President Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1965.
The real victory was what this period did to the psyche of the black man.
One cannot ever forget Martin's very deep commitment to lifting the burden of oppression from the backs of his people.
We all wanted to do something of great value, right? So that drove us as well.
He could orchestrate the Hosea Williams, Jesse Jackson, Andy Young, Abernathy, orchestrate us, keep us out of one another's way, and maximize our abilities. It was just amazing. He was a leader of leaders.
He would just let the discussion go and just let us argue it out. And after he'd heard everybody's opinion, he would usually develop a consensus. And he would pick the best of everybody's ideas, and he would frame it so that everybody agreed. And that was that. Once he spoke finally, that was the decision.
His greatest attribute was his ability to bring people together, people of all levels, black and white, rich and poor.
He just had a way of drawing people to him. You have to leave feeling good once you had a conversation with Dr. King.
He was able to uplift people to the dream, to be so inspired to the vision, that they would even do that which was unnatural, control themselves. If Black America had risen up in violent reaction, it would have been a disaster.
Then the inevitable, violence. This for some was better than nonviolent resistance. A fiery young activist named Stokely Carmichael called for black power.
Leader for America, what's good for black people? Who has a victory of killing and lynching people and throwing them in rivers? It's our apostles, and now people are telling me to stoop down to that level. Oh no! Oh no! Perpetuated evil throughout our civilization. I'm sick and tired of violence. I'm not going to use violence, no matter who says it.
Cries of "burn, baby, burn" filled the air shortly thereafter, and Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolence came under attack. He knew this method had worked for Gandhi in India, but would it work in America?
We have a power. Power that can't be found in Molotov cocktails, but we do have a power. A power that cannot be found in bullets and in guns, but we have a power. King's
first attempt to organize in a northern city met with a bitterness and anger. unlike that experienced in the South.
But I can say that I have never seen, even in Mississippi and Alabama, mobs as hostile and as hate-filled as I've seen in Chicago. I speak out against this war because I'm disappointed with America. Negroes and white boys will fight in brutal solidarity on the battlefields of Vietnam, but when they get back home, it's doubtful that their children will be able to sit together in the same classroom. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
By now, Martin Luther King, at age 39, had been jailed many times. His life was threatened, his house bombed and stoned. He'd been ridiculed and denounced, yet he stood firm with his inner thoughts and convictions. And then Memphis. Destiny and fate collided in a small hotel less than 400 miles from where this Nobel Prize winner and consummate leader was born.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Precious Lord, take my hand.
If any of you around, when I have to meet my day, I don't want a long funeral. And if you get somebody to deliver the eulogy, tell them not to talk too long. Every now and then I wonder what I want them to say. Tell them not to mention that I have a Nobel Peace Prize. That isn't important. Tell them not to mention that I have 300 or 400 other awards. That's not important. Tell them not to mention where I went to school. I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I won't have any money to leave behind. I won't have the fine and luxurious things of life to leave behind. But I just want to leave a committed life behind. And that's all I want to say. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word song, if I can show somebody he's traveling wrong, then my living will not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian, or if I can bring salvation to a world once lost, if I can spread the message as the Master taught, then my living will not be in vain.
And lead me home.
But dreams don't die. King's widow, Coretta Scott King, developed a relentless persistence toward the goal of keeping the dream alive. She set out to make certain this nation wouldn't forget the man who was her husband and the visionary whose mission had changed the world's understanding of race relations and African Americans. In 1986, President Ronald Reagan signed the bill making Dr. King's birthday a national holiday. Passionately remembered, the flame of his inspiration ignited a quest for freedom and justice that echoes the cries of his foreparents, whose struggle, blood, sweat, and tears laid this immortal foundation upon which we must continually build.